Then said the Jews, Behold, how he loved him. And some of them said, Could not this man which opened the eyes of the blind have caused that even this man should not have died? Jesus therefore, again groaning in himself, cometh to the grave. It was a cave, and a stone lay upon it. Jesus said, Take ye away the stone. Martha, the sister of him that was dead, saith unto him, Lord, by this time he stinketh, for he hath been dead 4 days. Jesus saith unto her, Said I not unto thee, that if thou wouldst believe, thou shouldest see the glory of God? Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead was laid. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me. I knew that thou hearest me always, but because of the people which stand by, I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. And when he thus had spoken, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin. Jesus said unto them, Loosen him and let him go.
And Jonathan, this is one of those stories of grief that has the happy ending, and there are not a lot of them yet in the world in which we live, but Jesus had the power to bring the happy ending through the raising from the dead of Lazarus. Now, of course, that's something that we look forward to in the future, but for now, we have to deal with the dying part and the death part and the separation and the trauma of having to deal with that and having to live with that day by day. The idea of having to be the one left behind, so to speak. Very, very, very difficult to cope with. Let's look at, because I want to just see if we can wrap up this part and get to the practicality, set it up for the second hour of how do you deal with it. Let's look at a prophecy in Isaiah 53, verses 3 to 9, that gives us a sense of Jesus' not only ability to understand grief, but his ability to take our grief upon himself.
He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows, and acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he hath borne our griefs, and carried our sorrows. Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. All we, like sheep, have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is dumb. So he opened not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment. And who shall declare his generation? For he was cut off out of the land of the living. For the transgression of my people was he stricken. And he made his grave with the wicked, and with the rich in his death, because he had done no violence, neither was any deceit in his mouth.
And Jonathan, this is a very beautiful prophecy describing the work of Jesus as coming as the ransom for all mankind. And it talks about being a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. He understood grief. He knew grief. He recognized it. And yet, even though he was such, even though he had borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, I mean, that's what he came to do. He came to carry the sorrows of a world gone mad, to carry and to take away the grief of a world gone mad. And even though he did that, he was looked upon in a very, very negative sense. And he was despised of men. And remember, when he hung on the cross, he was mocked. And you see the tremendous contradiction of the one who is to eventually remove all of the grief and all of the sorrow from every man, woman, and child who ever lived. In the paying of the price that was necessary for that, what he received was mockery and insult and being numbered with the thieves, so to speak. So this prophecy puts that in perspective, and it gives you the sense of the price that's necessary to really remove grief, because that's what Jesus' sacrifice did. It actually removed grief from the scene. Now, it hasn't taken full effect at this point, but that is the end result of his sacrifice. And Fred, how much time do we have?
1 minute to music.
Okay, thanks. Jonathan, as we wrap up this portion of the program, one of the important parts to understand is, and one of the things we wanted to accomplish in the first hour, is lay out the fact that grief is something very real, and the Scriptures give us a lot of looks at what it is, at how it works, and how devastating, how absolutely devastating it can be. In the second hour, the real big question that we want to start with is, okay, we understand that. How do we handle our own grief? What is it that we can do to handle it? Now, there were a couple of comments. Julius had mentioned avoiding self-pity, and Randall had mentioned being involved and going out and doing other things. All of those things are necessary, but there's a process, and it's very different for each one of us. So we want to discuss that, put it into perspective, and get a handle on grief so we can understand that this too shall pass. For Jonathan and Rick, this is Christian Questions. We'll be back again after the news and all of that, but until then, can there be good grief? We'll be back soon. Think about it.